Firstly, thank you for joining me. For everyone else who's joining us for maybe the very first time, this is Fringe Legal Edge. This is a weekly show I host where I have experts and leaders on to talk about things that will give your practice an edge. And today, actually, we're going to probably widen the scope of our discussion. I'm speaking to Jackie around access to justice and basically what the future looks like for the justice system. But Jackie is a lawyer, she's a futurist, and she works within the legal landscape, spotting trends, developments, and helps people go beyond the hype. She has an extensive leadership and legal workflow management background and has been implementing legal tech and AI successfully in the past. She heads up Law for All. We'll get into that in a little bit, but it's an alternative legal service provider that fights for access to justice. And last of all, Jackie is joining us from Cape Town, I believe, right?
Yeah, from Cape Town, sunny Cape Town. It's so lovely. Our summer finally started. So
winter just started here in Chicago, so I am extremely jealous. Well, thank you so much for joining me. And actually, I'll also give a hat tip to Michael Almeida, who actually introduced us in the first place. But yeah, tell us. Let's start with telling us a bit more about what Law for All is, and I'm curious to hear how you got involved in there, and we'll use that as a thread to go into A to J.
Okay. Law for All has been going on for 25 years. It started just as South Africa, transitioned into our new democratic government, with the core focus of making the law more affordable and accessible. Obviously, South Africa was plagued with a lot of inequality and a lot of challenges. So it came about as an informal way. In South Africa, you have these things called societies where everyone puts in a little bit of money every month, and then once a year, they share it. Like you can go buy yourself a fridge, or you buy yourself, whatever you want to do. So on the same principle, Law for All started as everyone pitches in, say, the equivalent of $1. Mm-hmm. And when you need legal help, you use this saving to pay for a lawyer because the law is so unaffordable. Obviously, this is very based on an insurance principle, but in the informal settlements in South Africa, it was called a society. So that's the premise that it was based on. And in 25 years, it's evolved tremendously. I mean, as we stand, we provide legal service to over 1 million clients. We have a lot of in-house lawyers that work for us, and we go through about 10,000 legal cases every month. So it is a high volume, high impact organization dealing with everything from criminal matters, civil, labor, family, whatever you've got. As regulation and everything evolved around the world, we morphed it more into an insurance framework. And I think you might be familiar with legal protection insurance, or I think in the States it's called legal plans.
I don't know. I'm more familiar with the UK legal system, so.
Oh, you are? Okay.
Yeah.
Legal insurance protection. Yeah. So we kind of school it on that basis. Mm-hmm. And we have found it to be one of the most successful models, in our opinion, to bridging a vast access to justice gap. With that, though, you can't just do that model alone. So we rely incredibly heavily on technology to aid this high volume workflow to ensure that we can cater to, the population that we do serve.
Awesome. So
we'll in a nutshell.
We'll dig into some of those items.
Okay.
How did you get involved in this? What's the connection there? I
started it there almost straight out of varsity after I did my admission, mm-hmm. and I was drawn to making a difference, but in South Africa, the government institutions aren't always the place to go if you want to make a difference. So looking at different organizations that make a dent in bringing the law to the people. So it's just the ethos of the company really, really relate to me. And it's 15 years later, I've been there, 15, 20 years.
Wow, that's insane. Yeah. Kudos to you. I know. And as do you take, inspiration may not be the right word. And I ask this question because access to justice is a issue that's been, it's not a new thing. It's been an ongoing problem, frankly, for lack of a better word, for decades and decades. I feel that Law for All and others have done some work to improve the conditions, to improve access to justice. Still, if you ask anyone, I'm sure who's part of the system, whether they're an advocate or they are working through one of these foundation charities and companies, we're not where anyone wants to be, right? There's plenty of room to grow and improve. How do you feel? And I don't know anything about the South African legal system. I'll be the first one to say that. How do you feel this stands in comparison to the US or the UK or other legal systems?
Firstly, access to justice is such a wide, complex problem. It's a dynamic, I look at the justice system as a complex adaptive system, and there are so many components to it. So everyone's trying to fix one little nugget of the problem, but there's so many structural flaws that exist in the justice system. So all our linear, even Law for All, just solving one way of an access point doesn't make a dent in the crisis that there is, the structural flaw. So you are absolutely right. For that to change, it's going to take a massive paradigm shift from government, from private practice, from the society as a large to really, really change. And that's a more philosophical discussion about what is justice, and how do we, but that's
we'll table that for another day.
When it comes to South Africa, it's quite interesting in my opinion, most countries are facing exactly the same problems. The law is expensive no matter where you go. It's relative to your income. So if you are in the UK, law is still expensive. No matter how innovative it's been tried with alternative business models, or it's still pricey to go see a solicitor or to get act. If you are in South Africa, relative to your income, it is expensive. In the States, the same thing. And I recently did quite an interesting study where I looked at the World Justice Project. They did a phenomenal global study on access to justice and measuring everything. And we took it back locally to see how it affects South Africans. And then I took it back to the World Justice Project data to see, irrespective of where a country lies on the rule of law index, irrespective of where they lie on their financial well-being, educational levels, all of those aspects, the justice system is traumatic, it is inaccessible, and people struggle with it. Whether you are in Denmark or in Afghanistan, it's the same experience. So it definitely is a global problem.
Yeah, and actually, for anyone who's not aware, so the WJP, the World Justice Project, puts out, I think it's their annual report on the what's called the Rule of Law Index, and they survey 128 countries, hundreds of households, and around 4,000 or 5,000 legal practitioners. And I think the report, I skimmed through it. It showed that this year, 2020, had seen the biggest decline in terms of areas of fundamental rights, in basically constraints on government powers, and basically the absence of corruption, i.e. there is corruption, where 51 countries, for example, declined there and 26 improved. It's a fascinating report if you want to get because it's an important report to read as well, because if you're in a certain segment of law, so if you are practicing big law, then you may likely not be aware of some of these things, right? Because it gets, you're almost sheltered from it. And, I'll give credit to many of the larger law firms that do have pro bono programs that do support that. But to your point, there are many issues to resolve. And they vary so greatly. I mean, in my experience, if you are, certainly if I've spoken to a number of Southeast Asian or African countries, and speaking to people there, and I mean, ultimately they have an issue with being able to get reliable IDs, where there are millions and millions of migrant workers that don't have any ID they can verify, which is an obstacle to even getting help and support. In more developed countries, you have issues with dispute resolution. Almost all countries, including the US, you have issues with things like affordable legal help for family law matters. And I think generally across the world, there's certainly an issue in contracting in plain language. The fact that you need an advanced degree, and I have a law degree, and sometimes you have to read a contract 10 times to understand what it's trying to say. That's not the right way to do things.
You know, you're so right, because people are very quick when you're in the access to justice domain. They're very quick to be nasty to big law and have a lot of comments on big law. I view it as there's a spectrum of law. You have, unfortunately, access to justice is always viewed as the very marginal groups, you know, the very, very of the poor, which is not the case. Access to justice transcends, I think, 80% of the legal spectrum. And then you have big law, but we can all coexist in this ecosystem and assist one another and help one another. And there is so much room and space for big law, and may they prosper, and you know, they drive a very important agenda as well. I wish the access to justice discussion would widen beyond just the most marginal groups, because that missing middle, who are employed people that are struggling to just afford basic legal services when and if they need it, they can't usually, I don't know the case in the UK and all in other jurisdictions, but they can't always rely on legal aid and pro bono matters because they just miss the mark. Yeah. So we're sitting with a huge untapped market of people who need the law, but no one is providing to them. They can't afford the big law firms. And I find it very curious that so few law firms are being innovative and packaging solutions for that segment, because there are billions of people in that segment. I think the UK is probably interesting, you know, trying with different business models to get more innovative propositions of selling the law to that market.
And I think it is so jurisdictionally dependent, because UK is a good example. I think Canada is trying a couple of things. No one, I mean, in the realm of providing this kind of legal service, no one has cracked the code. No one has figured out one way to package this that just works. And because, of course, the law is governed differently across different jurisdictions, that adds an extra complexity. And I do think it does require there to be both, you know, an effort from those that are really passionate about this, because it's, you know, it's not any easier than practicing any type of law. It's still hard work, and frankly, it's, you know, it's very emotional work. And making sure that there are policies and regulations and the laws that actually support that, because there does need to be a change in the legal system. Again, something that's much wider and probably a philosophical discussion for another day, but that sort of lies there. Well, one of the things you talked about at the beginning, and I noticed on the Law for All website as well, is you sort of make a statement around embracing technology to make law more human. What does that mean, and how does Law for All sort of, you know, utilize technology?
Okay, so we have about 12 years ago, we started developing our own software. It was the whole buy or develop. And we couldn't find software that really answered our high volume game that we are in. So we got a few developers that started working for us, and we went paperless, I think in 2012. Yeah, our first case manager system. And obviously through the years, we've been enhancing it. We've been playing around with AI and different tools to really get the case flow as efficient as we possibly can, to aid our lawyers to do what they have to do to the best of their abilities. So we keep it very human, because we don't want our clients to interact with a virtual anything. Right. We want our clients to be able to come to our office or pick up a phone or do a video call and speak to a lawyer. In my opinion, consumers aren't yet there, and I'm talking specifically from the South African perspective, but it is my take from you know, overseas, visiting people, speaking to people. They're not there yet where they feel comfortable to discuss a traumatic event, and the law is traumatic to most people, with a digital simulation of sorts. So we want to keep a human front end to the system, but really powered by powerful technology that helps our lawyers to excel to the best that they can.
Yeah.
It also helps us with efficiency. As I said, we are a high volume game. So
yeah.
to get through 10,000 cases a month, you've got to stay on your feet and use clever tools to do this.
No, and I love the positioning of having the human front end and machine back end, I guess, by definition, because you're right. It is the way to do it. And I think there are other companies where you are really truly disrupting, and I don't use that word lightly in this case, how it's done, because you need to be able to triage what gets addressed at what point and how quickly to make sure that, as you said, it is an experience thing, and it is a societal experience thing, because actually, frankly, probably a lot of people who have never engaged with lawyers for anything, they likely have a prejudice to what it might be like working with lawyers based on TV, based on stories, based on just, speaking to their colleagues and co-workers and colleagues and friends. So you have to be able to turn that around, and you really have to delight them with a natural, simple experience, right? And it's that
Absolutely.
sort of bringing that, a lot of that consumer focused thing. So look, assume this wasn't a law firm. This was another type of service that you're going for, that doesn't have terrible preconditions or preconceptions. What would that experience be like, and how do we bring that to law? And I think it's super important. I think there's some firms that are also trying the same thing, or definitely not at that kind of scale of 100,000 cases a month.
No, I mean, many companies are trying that, and I think it's so valuable for lawyers to get out of their skill mindset and their professional mindset to also look at the customer experience. So, but unfortunately, few firms are doing it. But it's a valuable exercise to go through your customer journey from a client walking in, imagining what type of clients walk in, what emotional response they already are entering your office with, and then do the classic customer journey map. Where are all the touch points, and what technology, what soft skills, what can you use to augment and make sure that every experience makes the justice process less, I don't know, horrible.
Yep. And actually, I look at the financial industry for this, and especially insurance, because I think people have probably the same level of experience, and more people tend to interact with insurers than they do lawyers. And the experience is the same, right? You're going through these horrible loops where you are, speaking to a service agent, or certainly if you have to make a claim, you have to go through all the legal jargon that you don't really understand, all the loopholes you have to try and jump through. And there are some companies, and one that comes to mind is a company called Lemonade here in the US, who've done the same thing, right? They want to do this at scale. So they bridge the gap by creating an AI tool that goes and triages it, and they just mostly approve most claims, because they're like, most of these claims are not an issue. Someone lost their phone, let's just give them a refund. They don't need to speak to a person. You do it on an app, and it's just much more modern. And as more of these things come to mind, I think people's perceptions honestly will change, because there should be, lawyers have tremendous value in society. There is, the rule of law is there for a reason. But you need to make sure that people want to engage with them and actually have a conversation and can understand what they're saying. I keep coming back to this point because, one of the things we learned at the bar was you have to do things in plain English, because you, especially at that level as a barrister or a litigator, often in the US, I guess, you are speaking to another human being rather than a corporate entity. So the need to basically translate things into plain English is so important.
Yeah, it's a critical thing. So the plain language movement is something to really be commended, because that is a great access to justice hurdle in itself already, because for too long we tried to keep the law really complicated, but to justify the whole model of practice, so it makes sense. But you sit with challenges, like in South Africa, we've got 11 official languages.
Right.
So dealing with clients from all backgrounds, and you have to keep language as plain as simple, because you have to be able to converse in your third or fourth language to solve a matter. So to try and have this proper English is not going to work.
No. Yeah,
And the
I
same in
can't even
Europe,
imagine that.
where,
Yeah.
yeah, but the same in Europe. And I mean, where you have so many different languages, it is helpful if we decide that English is going to be the contracting language or the language that we resolve this dispute in.
Mm.
Surely it should be as simple for all parties to the case to understand.
Yeah, and sometimes it feels
Mm,
like you're in a UN assembly hall trying to understand 15, 20 languages as you're trying to talk about one point. Um,
mm, mm,
so we have about 10 minutes remaining. So there's a couple of things I wanted to ask about. One of the key things I wanted to get out of this conversation was to have a wider reach and platform for some of these issues, and I think
mm,
we've outlined what some of them are.
mm.
What would you say are some of the resources that should people want to become more aware? Because I think awareness is certainly something that's not as widespread as it
Mm,
can be, and then there are some great organizations that really work on that. What are some of the
mm.
resources that you would point people to? And of course, and Law for All might be one of them.
I definitely to the World Justice Project. I think they do phenomenal work and they have great research insights and data tools to shed
Mm.
light on. The Task Force on Justice is also incredible body. They came together and with elders and people from all across the world. Um, they released a wonderful report last year on access to justice and where it stands, looking at in all the different pathways to justice that have sprouted around the world. I mean, everywhere from the Bahamas to Nigeria,
Right.
and how people are trying innovative ways and different pathways to get to justice. And it's really wildly interesting to see how similar, no matter where you are, these informal pathways that have sprouted
Mm.
um, are amazing. And they're solving a lot of justice issues without the intervention of court, which I think is a very
It's
positive
amazing.
thing.
Yeah.
Um, so they're a great organization. I think the Hague Institute of Innovating Law is also a wonderful program in The Hague. They do funding for justice innovators all over the world. And it's really programs that like that are kind of getting your informal justice providers and different solutions, thinking outside of the box of what we normally do in practice, or looking at new tech startups, or
Yeah.
creative things. So they have justice competitions and funded, and there's been some amazing things that have come out from their program.
Awesome. And yeah, I think I'll add probably two more to that. So World Justice Project is certainly at top of my list,
Mm.
and it's worldjusticeproject.org for anyone who wants to check that out. Anyone in the US, I would also recommend Harvard's A2J Lab, which is,
Oh yeah, yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
I'm a big fan of that as someone
Mm.
to get foundational knowledge, because
Mm.
they have a very good mission, although it's focused on the US. I think the mission is certainly noble to just enable more people to have access to lawyers and civil justice that can't afford it,
Mm.
and to make this the criminal justice system fairer, and promote
Mm.
dignity, which actually I think is very important, especially when you are dealing with family law matters. The other one I will say, certainly actually your website has a lot of good resources. I'll give you credit, so you don't have to, as you're being a bit modest. But I think there's really good research and writings there actually that link to important
Mm.
issues. And then, as you said, there's a number of technology providers and platforms that are coming up that are tackling this in different jurisdictions.
Mm.
And I think one that got announced this week is Legaler Aid, which is a crowdfunding of social justice cases. And so worth checking that out. That's sort of hot off the press for this week. I think, I mean, it's such an important issue. How do you see Law for All evolving further? It's still South Africa based right now, or are you sort
Yeah,
of expanding widely?
it is South African based. Our justice problems are so much, so it keeps us busy. We would like to expand, so we are looking at the European market to see if there's traction there, and in Africa as well,
Mm.
and north up in Africa. We have been playing with technology a lot, so we've stayed local as we play
Experimented.
around and see what works.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's a difficult thing to do. When we started working with AI, I think it was about 4 or 5 years ago.
Mm.
Yeah, 5 years, time's flown. I mean, the lessons that we have learned have been so phenomenal. And you think, oh, we're going to get this AI tool, it's going to be quick
Right.
and simple, boom, plug in and play, but it's not. So we've really learned, and you want to take something very cool to market.
Mm.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's so many people that talk about legal tech and AI and these things, but they really are nothing more than a decision tree. So
Right.
um,
How do you utilize AI for what you're doing?
we are currently just using it still in the very basics of when we are taking in cases. So we take an initial instruction from our clients
Mm-hmm.
to give us a very comprehensive, like, legal map of how to solve this problem.
Sure.
So we look at our backlog of cases that we've got, not our backlog, our database of cases. I mean, we've got hundreds of cases, but they weren't always properly indexed. They weren't properly, the same
It's
things that
unstructured
we,
data. Yeah. Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. So yeah, we're playing around with that at the
Awesome. No,
moment, which
that's
is
really
very fun.
interesting. And I guess the last point, because I know you wrote or spoke about this recently. How do you see COVID having an impact? And I ask that because outside of the general impact it's had on the world, it's also meant that many people have lost jobs. Of course,
Mm,
people's health have been impacted and things of that nature, and some of them had struggled to. As you said, the fees are so high; they struggled with that
mm.
manner. So how's that impacted what you're seeing in the market?
And well, the future could always go so many different ways. When I look at it, I'm an optimist by nature. So I'd like to think that it was a time of reflection for everyone. And in that struggle, a greater awareness of sustainability, a greater awareness of kindness would come about. And lawyers have learned how to be more agile, how to adjust to everything. There's been a lot of lawyers who have been helping pro bono work, who have been helping at very reduced cost. So I'm hoping that that positivity of a new way of doing things may remain. But then there's also a future where we completely devolve back to how we were, and things become worse, and the economy struggles more and more. But I do think something is changing in the world, and there's definitely a push into sustainability. And that sustainability is not, the legal system is not insulated from that. So that definitely becomes a part of the normal practice landscape. And all my lawyers and big law friends that I have, their
Yeah.
conversation is changing. They
Yeah.
are very aware of their position and their role in the ecosystem. So I think it's a very positive thing, and everyone's moving to the future at different velocities.
Yeah.
But eventually we all get to the same ideal,
Yeah.
or the same pursuit of justice.
Yeah, I think that is a wonderful place to start wrapping it up. So Jackie Nagtegaal, thank you so much for joining me. So if anyone wants to find Jackie, she heads up Law for All. If you Google Fringe Legal Edge and Jackie, when this goes live on the podcast, you'll find a link to all the resources we talked about. My plea to all the lawyers would be, please get involved in pro bono projects as much as you can. My plea to anyone who works within the legal system, know that there are hundreds of small problems that need to be addressed when it comes to access to justice. And you can make a contribution to any one of them without giving up too much of your time and effort, and it will add up. And yeah, I think I'm glad that this is a more prominent topic than it had been even 12 months ago. And I will join you in your optimism that things will continue to improve, and we'll get to this at that point. But thank you so much for joining me.
Pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. It was great. Have a wonderful Friday.
Thank you. You too. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks. Okay.